Hi, I'm Boyd Branch, and I'm a theater artist and digital media designer. And today I'm going to be talking to you briefly about designing with slides. As a scientist or an engineer working in biology, it's inevitable that you're going to be speaking to the public about your work, and you're going to be wanting to use visuals to help tell that story. Now, visuals play an important role in communication. And to understand that role, we need to think really specifically about the purpose of every single choice that we're making when we're designing. Just like you have to think very thoroughly when you're constructing a test to understand a particular phenomenon in biology. When you're setting up your experiment, you have very deliberate and specific things that you're going to test and test against. When you're designing your slides, you want to have just as much forethought about what the impact is. Because when we're speaking with a purpose. We want people to receive a particular information. We want them to understand a particular idea. And as visual creatures, the visual world will play a big role in how people receive what we're saying. And not just the content. Designing with purpose means thinking about all of the aesthetic choices that one can take and one can make when putting graphics on a screen. The subtle shift in color can slightly increase emphasis. It can distinguish between what is important and what is mildly important. It can give your presentation a feeling of professionalism, and it can also give it a feeling of being rushed together and being put together without a lot of forethought. And so when you're designing, you have to think about a lot of different factors beyond just, does this chart or does this graphic represent something that I would actually use to describe the phenomenon that I am presenting on. Good design is about creating relationships. You want to have your slides dialogue with you. If your presentation is dominated by imagery, then there's a likelihood that your audience will disengage from what you're saying and focus more on what you're looking at. In thinking about relationships, you want to think about how things compare to each other. Here we see that the Acme recycling facility represents $2.3 million in its current state. If I want to make a distinction between that and the significant changes that will happen in 5 years, the text stays the same, but by increasing the scale and shifting the color, we can immediately clue the audience into the parameter that we want them to focus on. The words themselves convey so much information, but shape and scale and color communicate a whole lot more to us. When we're designing slides, we're guiding the viewer in where they're supposed to look. And how you place your text, where you place it, is going to determine what they look at. You want to think about guiding the user's eye. Here we've got some text, and if you take a second just to look at it. And as you're looking at it, I want you to think about and follow, where does your eye want to go? What path does it follow? So for many people, the way that the slide is particularly designed is going to lead you from this corner over into this corner, down into this, back over into the red. And the reason why this works is because I've placed a line subtly, which is something that eyes look for. We're looking for a difference. We're looking for the distinction in topography and terrain. It's something that we've developed through evolution as we were hunters and gatherers. Determining shapes and what makes one thing different from another is crucial to whether we eat that day or not. And so when we're designing, we're actually leveraging these sort of ancient capacities to distinguish between geometry and shape to tell a story. So here the story is, all the text, the content is the same, but it's leading the eye in a direction. If I change this up a little bit, we see that where our eye is going to look is going to dramatically change. So take a second and look at this slide. Does your eye go from top to bottom? Does it go from right to left? Where does it guide it? When you're designing your slides, you want to think about what's the most important information that you're trying to communicate to your audience. What takeaway do you want them to have? One of the mistakes that we make when we're designing is thinking we want to just make sure we cover all of our bases. But the live presentation format is not one in which we are exhaustively demonstrating data and presenting it. If you want your audience to really understand the nuances of a particular graph, you're going to have to invite them to read your paper later or look at your poster. But in this setting, we want to create a relationship that helps them understand the significant thing that you're saying. As the eye is directed, we can use that to great advantage. In this case, we're bringing the eye following that arrow. The red, which at least in a lot of Western culture represents something exciting or fire, something that can be dangerous or repel us, has a certain kind of energy to it. It's the only, the hue itself is something that the eye is going to want to go to, but the difference between that hue and the hues of the other text are going to create a relationship that bounces our eye around this frame. So let's look at a practical example of how some of these decisions about color and shape can be applied. Here's a slide from a student of mine who was presenting about life cycles. And she was talking about she was doing a life cycle assessment of a power plant and looking at this from what she describes as this cradle to grave use of materials. And so she has this slide with all of her information, and we've got lots of colors here. We've got some big fonts, and we've got some fonts covering up other fonts. We've got this black background, and what happens is we have this overstimulation of visual information. We don't know what we're supposed to look at. What are we supposed to be comparing? Are we comparing the colors between the lines? Is something good? Is something bad? What is the meaning here? Here we have data and information, but we don't have an easy way to understand how we're supposed to move through this. We've got arrows that are driving us to go in this direction, but we really have these other arrows. We have a red arrow pointing up and a green arrow pointing down, and it's hard to know what that means and why it's placed there. So when you have a set of information like this may be useful and meaningful for you in the context of your paper. You want to think about, well, how can you quickly communicate what's important to your audience? In this case, it was really important to her to describe and to make people understand that this is a process that happens from a beginning to an end process, and you have to think about the entire cycle. So we changed the slide around to try to represent more of what she wanted to get across. By getting rid of as much of that color as possible and organizing material, this slide now real quickly clues us into a particular relationship. We know that there's a linear relationship that we want to follow. This arrow is letting us know that we're going from one side to the next, that there's a particular way to read it. The text is extrapolated from the particular graphics that we're looking at. The graphics are of a kind of a size and scale that they make sense in relationship to each other. And the colors are simplified as much as possible. We still do have a fair amount of color in these slides, but the amount of blue allows us to focus on the content inside of these pictures and see what the relationship is. We're going from raw materials, processing, into the disposal. And so by simplifying, using color strategically, bringing our graphics into a readable format can do great wonders for helping the audience clue in on the significant point that you're trying to make. Color is, frankly, a dangerous thing to play with. In working with color, we need to be mindful of a lot of different things. And not everyone sees color the same way, and many of us are colorblind. And so when you're thinking about using color, you want to think about, well, do you really need it? And if so, why? One of the worst mistakes one can make is using colors in a way that makes it hard to read your text. Green and orange are colors that hurt many of our eyes. I look at that, I'm suffering right now as I'm seeing this slide as you're seeing it, and I immediately want to shift it because it causes a kind of Well, to be perfectly frank, a nauseated feeling. As we look at here, and it may even be hard for you to read, it says, don't let colors distract from your message. And the word colors has a unique, special unicorn color for each letter, which in the process of making may feel really exciting and good, may speak to a particular aesthetic that you enjoy. But when you're thinking about your audience, you want to clue them into the message and the story that you're telling, not your particular interest in rainbows. Instead, we want to think about using color as a way to specifically communicate meaning. Keeping all of your text and all of your material in a monochromatic environment allows you to draw emphasis on what's important. In this slide, here we say, instead we want to use it to communicate. And the emphasis, of course, is on the word communicate. And by using a subtle color here of red, we're able to draw attention to that. We've all seen this slide, this bar chart with lots of different colors. We look at it, and what are we supposed to glean from this? In this particular slide, the color is overwhelming the data. What's meaningful about the data is getting lost in the colorful array. We don't know what green means from blue, and even if you put a legend on your slide, your audience is going to be able to read it. Instead, you want to think about using slides in a way that your information and the data that's significant pops out. Limiting your color palette allows you to focus on the particular area of information that's important to you. Let's talk a little bit about text. Decisions about the fonts you choose really do have a giant impact. If you look at this, what do you read? What's easy to read? What's hard to read? Of course, the top line, it's on the top, it's visually dominant, and in big bold letters, it's easy to read. Decisions about text matter with an exclamation point. How that comes across is different than not being in caps and italicizing. And it's not about whether one is a correct way to present or an incorrect way. It's about what gets the point across. As we move into more text and bullet points, the legibility of your text is going to become harder and harder to follow. In a presentation, we really want to be connecting more directly with our audience through our voice and through the stories that we're telling. So we want to minimize and limit text so that it really only is communicating the most essential aspect of our message. Typography is a way that we communicate what's important. It's a way that we communicate our value system. You think about line as a representation of things that are important to you. Clean, direct lines represent a clean, direct presentation. Curvy text that doesn't line up in perfect symmetry can communicate something about chaos or about being in a relaxed or comfortable state. And context is really what distinguishes whether Comic Sans is appropriate or whether it's distracting. We want to think specifically about the language of our slides. Here I cleverly say you want to steer clear of verbosity in attempting to articulate the importance of the idea that you usually use jargon for. We could just be concise. And that's really our purpose, is just to let the slide, the visual information, support the information that we're saying. Next, we want to look about, well, how do you select the images? When looking at our images for projection, in particular, we want to be mindful of the resolution of the projector that we're working with. You want to design your visual elements to match the resolution of whatever final output you're going to. When you're looking for images, on Google Images, for instance, you have the option of choosing different sizes of images. You want to make sure that your content is a proper size. These jagged edges that demonstrate low resolution do speak to less attention to your design. If your content has watermarks, that means you're probably not licensed to use it. We're going to talk a little bit about copyright in the next slide. But we want to avoid at all costs text or images that we're not allowed to use. We want to avoid clip art and really just think about using images that directly speak to what we're talking about. Oftentimes we'll take an image and and it's too big or too small for our format. And so we think, oh, we'll just squish it down. Well, rather than squishing, you want to think about cropping. Select what's important from your image and crop it to what's important. The larger information about the ladybug is irrelevant. It's really we want to look at the specific insect. You want to think about a rule of thirds. This is a conventional rule in design and art where the eye naturally falls into these different planes of an image. Place the most important content that you have on vertices that intersect. This is naturally where the eye wants to go. And we look at an image that's full screen. The top third of the frame is typically where we associate eye height with. And so think about where you're placing your content so that the eye can naturally follow where it wants to. Let's talk about copyright. We have a wonderland of content available to us through the internet, but not all of it is actually available to us to use in our presentations. So how do you know what you can use and what you can't? Well, there's an organization that makes it really easy for us, and that is the Creative Commons. The Commons creates a licensing system where we can find out what images are licensed to be used for, and we can also license our images to be used by others. So you want to look at the different kinds of licenses that an image has. And today, it's pretty easy to find out whether an image is licensed for use or not. If you can't find the license, you're probably not able to use it. So do your due diligence. If it asks for an attribution, make sure that you're putting that artist's name who took that photo or created that image. If it's saying no derivatives, then you need to honor that and find a different kind of image. If it's shareable, then you follow those rules. And be careful of the distinction between if you're making money off of the use of the images or not. Here's a list of some popular places that you can look at to find images that you're licensed to use. In the Google Advanced Search image page, you can actually filter specifically for images that are licensed for your type of use. Archive.org is a fantastic resource that has access to a lot of images that are out in the public domain that you're free to use. Biology Image Library, Library of Congress, all of these are great resources that you can take advantage of. Finally, when in doubt, you want to kiss it. Keep it simple. If you don't need that slide, if you don't need that text, cut it. Thank you. My name is Boyd Branch, and this has been a presentation on how to present with slides.